future developments.
Thank you. We'll begin with Mr. Schaefer for the next question. In 2020, there will be a proposition on the ballot to reform Prop 13. What are your thoughts on this proposal?
Great. So we were hoping that this would come up in 2018, but it looks like the people that were the proponents decided to put it on the 2020 ballot. It can't get here soon enough. This is a proposal to split the role of the corporations from residents on Prop 13. Now, I would argue that we actually already have a split role. The corporations get more benefits than the residents. They do not turn over. They can use shell corporations in the middle of their transfer to make sure that they do not actually transfer ownership, and the property tax stays the same, but they can actually do that and transfer ownership. When you know, this bill, this law was put in place to protect grandma and keep her in her home, it was sold that way. We do want to protect residents and keep them in their homes, so I'm glad the residential portion is on there. But you know, at some point, those houses do turn over and the property tax is reassessed. That's not the case on commercial properties. So you've got IBM and other companies making mint.
Mr. Gentleman.
So the way I know it right now, the way I feel about it is that I believe that it will disenfranchise individual homeowners and property owners, whether commercial property or not. So I think that people will be losing their properties to taxes. Taxes for property are generally high enough already. Now, if there's corporations that are taking advantage and you guys want to close those loopholes, I think that's fine. But we have to be balanced and make sure that we're not affecting mom and pop, grandma, grandpa, and young homeowners and property owners and those who have inherited. Let us not be so unbalanced that we create a bigger problem because we're only looking at the issue so short-sighted that corporations are getting away with something unreasonable. So there can be a balance there too. So I'm for keeping that stuff low because when it does sell individually, they go up. And if we want to close loopholes, we can do that. But the bottom line is, let's not be so unbalanced in the approach. So as of now, I would be against it unless there's some clear guidelines and policy to protect the individuals.
Thank you, Mr. Lee.
Right now, I haven't seen a compelling argument to really support repealing Prop 13. Obviously, I think the discussion is important just to understand our tax base. It will increase the cost of home housing for our families, because when you allow taxes to rise, the cost of the housing will rise just as fast. California is a gem. One of the things is that if you take a look in 1970, California was not the most populous state. It was the state of New York and Texas. Now, Texas, Florida, and New York are actually below the population of California. It's important that we increase the housing units in the state of California, but also in San Leandro, but we also have to factor that in with more open space.
Ms. Cutter.
Thank you. I do look forward to 2020 when it's going to be repealed. And I don't think it needs to be repealed completely, but what it does need to do is be evened up, because right now the corporations are enjoying a huge amount of being able to roll over their business without selling it, where individuals doing the same with their homes are getting charged for new taxes. I think that once we do something like that, though, we have to take a look at what that tax rate is. We can't just expect everybody to pay this high tax and take it as we're going to match our bills, our spending to those bills. So what we need to do is make sure that as we see the benefit of corporations being charged their fair share, then the taxes will go down for the individuals.
Thank you, and we'll begin with Mr. Dillman this time. Should San Leandro enact rent control?
So I come from both sides of the fence, an entrepreneur, a property owner, and I would just think it would be terrible to be told that, that I couldn't rent it out for a fair market value, or that you can't raise the rent. On the other hand, I have friends and colleagues that have been, displaced from housing being so high. So I think there needs to be a balance. I think we need to respect the entrepreneur, the property owners, those who inherit property so that they can make a living. And we also need to make sure that others can afford to live here. And so the solution does come from building more housing. And we can do that with my top idea, which is not my favorite idea because I'm against taxes in general and I'm against overtaxing and property taxes. But this is a real issue that together we need to solve, and we can solve it together, and then we can be flourishing with your investment in yourself.
Thank you. Mr. Lee?
I think this discussion has come up significantly a number of times. One thing about rent control is that once the tenant moves out, it goes back to market rate, and that market rate goes significantly higher because of the fact that the landlord would have to bake in additional costs, including the property taxes. I don't support rent control because of this. We have a rent review process that's very successful in terms of what it does. It does hold many of the landlords accountable, and I would look to the discussion of improving that process.
Thank you. At this point, I don't think rent control is the answer. I think it's one pillar of the problem. I think what we really need to do is get more housing out there. One of the things that we are doing is we've got about 1,000 units in the works some way or another, but mostly entitled. And we need to make sure that we continue that. One of the things, if you look at the rent control, where rent control is now, San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, it seems like they have the highest rents. I don't want to have a place where people start investing in their rents. As my colleague said, we have a rent review board, and we also now have a tenant protection ordinance that we put in place. I think that we're trying to make sure that instead of throwing out the baby with the wash, we're trying to make sure that we're putting protections in place, and we're moving slowly with that.
Mr. Schaefer?
Can you repeat the question, please?
I have to find it.
Rent control, how do you feel about that?
We need rent control now. We needed rent control last year. Other cities have successfully implemented rent control. This is not a pie-in-the-sky dream. This is something that other cities that are having problems with development and displacement have utilized for decades. We need that protection for San Leandro now. Developers and people that the apartment association will tell you that somehow if you have rent control, that rent prices are going to go up. I'm going to ask you this: if you limit the rent that can go up, will that decrease or increase the rent? The answer is that the most obvious, that will control rents. Rent control controls rents. I also want just cause for evictions, and I want protections for homeowners in case of foreclosures. We have to do everything we can to keep the people in San Leandro so we can develop the community that can be stable and help to pull everybody together to solve our biggest problems.
Thank you. And can we hold our applause, please? Thank you. So, Mr. Lee, we're going to begin with you. How do you plan to control the problems that come with the sale and use of marijuana? And how do you feel, this is a two-part deal, how do you feel about the location being associated with the family center? Does it belong there by families and children? That would be on Tea Garden, I believe.
Yeah, I think that was a discussion that I had with a number of folks who had those same concerns. And I think that discussion needs to happen. One of the things that I recognized from another city where they had that same concern with respect to a bar opening up, they had that discussion. The bar actually participated in the process and brought in security and actually brought a lot of community benefits in. So that discussion needs to happen to find the right balances.
And the part of the question associated with the family center, does it belong there by families and children?
Like I said, I believe that we need to have that discussion where we can find the right balances.
Ms. Cutter?
Okay, well, I'll answer the reverse part first. It's no question that I didn't believe that, I think it was be obvious. I didn't believe that it should be next to the family center.
I think we're looking at people having a hard time hearing.
Okay, yep, I'm just reading that out
Okay.
there. Okay, it's no question that I didn't believe that it should be at the resource center, next door. However, the public process took place and the Board of Zoning granted that, and I felt that the process was paramount because we trust our process to work, and so I didn't, go about trying to overturn that or anything like that. I do think that we are on the road to adult use marijuana, and I think that we need to get a dispensary open so we can show that it's not the boogeyman that everybody thinks it is, and I think that we're gonna find that it's gonna be something that San Leandro will be able to live with and among.
Thank you, and Mr. Schaefer.
I would alleviate the problems associated with marijuana by making sure San Leandrons had more access to munchies. What are the problems associated with marijuana that you don't find with alcohol, tobacco, driving, or any other activity that adults take part in that is licensed, regulated, and watched out by the community? What are the problems associated with marijuana beyond those items? I believe we need to have adult use recreational marijuana available in the city that can be taxed, licensed, and regulated within the city. We've already budgeted for marijuana sales in this city. We have lost that budget money. This is a revenue source that we're losing out to Ashland and Oakland. Let's recoup that money by making it feasible to open up our clinics in the city for adult use recreational marijuana.
I'm asking again that there's no applause. We'll wait till the end for the applause. I would appreciate your cooperation. Mr. Dillman.
I absolutely advocate for medical marijuana, recreational use, and it needs to be regulated, just like alcohol that's sold in Safeway or Lucky's, just like your cigarettes and all those other things. So I think we just need to take, once again, a balanced, centered approach and saying, yes, these things are okay, we're adults. We can make our own choices with clear guidelines. When it comes to Davis Street, I inherently trust the good that they do for the community. And if they've chosen to put it there, I'm fine with that. Once again, there's alcohol and liquor in grocery stores and Walmarts and Targets. So let's be balanced, let's be centered, and let's think positively that we trust Davis Street to operate their entities and their support system. And so I'm fine with it. And I think that we can grow the marijuana thing as well, balanced.
Thank you. Ms. Cutter,